was shot in the forehead, but still alive. Bleeding and dazed, Victor Tony Jones sat on a couch surrounded by blood, holding the belongings of the two people he had just killed. Just moments earlier, Jack and Dolly Nestor, a kind elderly couple who had given him a job only 2 days before, were stabbed to death inside their small Miami workshop. Jack, fatally wounded, fought back with a pistol, one final act of courage before he fell beside his wife. A simple act of kindness had turned into a scene of horror, driven by a mind twisted by years of pain and anger. Victor Tony Jones was born in 1961 in Florida. From a young age, his life was marked by neglect and violence. As a teenager, he was sent to the Okeechobee School for Boys, a reform school later exposed for brutal beatings, isolation, and abuse. There, boys were whipped, humiliated, and left in solitary confinement for days. Jones was one of them, a child punished instead of protected. Years later, he carried those wounds into adulthood. He drifted between prison sentences and short jobs, never finding stability or trust. By December 1990, he had just been released from prison and was desperate to start over. That's when he met Jack and Dolly Nestor, an elderly couple who owned small engineering business in Miami. Jack was an inventor, kind, patient, known for giving work to people who needed a second chance. When Jones came looking for a job, Jack said yes. For a brief moment, it seemed like life was finally offering him a way out. But kindness can sometimes awaken the deepest fears. 2 days later, when Dolly refused to pay him for unfinished work, Jones felt something old and familiar: rejection. In his mind, it wasn't just about money. It was about being dismissed, humiliated, and powerless again. That moment of wounded pride, mixed with years of buried anger, became the spark that set off everything that followed. It was the afternoon of December 19th, 1990, just days before Christmas. Inside the small workshop in Miami, Jack and Dolly Nestor were finishing their day's work. Victor Tony Jones, their new employee, had been quiet that morning, keeping to himself, his expression unreadable. At some point, a disagreement began. Dolly refused to pay him for a task she said wasn't finished. To her, it was a simple work issue. But to Jones, it felt like a personal rejection, another reminder of a life filled with disrespect and pain. In a sudden burst of rage, Jones grabbed a knife. He followed Dolly into the bathroom and stabbed her once in the neck. She collapsed instantly. Hearing her scream, Jack rushed in from his office. A violent struggle followed, desks overturned, tools scattered, blood spattered across the floor. Jack was a strong man in his 60s, fighting for his life and for his wife. Jones stabbed him in the chest, piercing his heart. But even as he was dying, Jack reached for his small pistol and fired 5 shots. One bullet struck Jones in the forehead. Minutes later, the shop fell silent. Jack and Dolly lay dead, side by side. Jones, bleeding but conscious, sat down on a couch. When police arrived, they found him surrounded by the couple's wallets, keys, and Dolly's purse, his pockets stuffed with their belongings. At the hospital, still wounded, Jones told the nurse, "They owed me money. I had to kill them." It was a cold, detached confession, the voice of a man long disconnected from empathy. In that moment, his past and present had collided, the abused child and the angry adult becoming one. Investigators quickly pieced together what had happened. Jones was arrested that same day and charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder and armed robbery. In 1993, the case went to trial. Prosecutors called it a cold-blooded act driven by greed. The defense argued Jones was deeply damaged from years of abuse at the Okeechobee School for Boys. But the evidence was overwhelming: the murder weapon, the confession, the stolen items. The jury convicted him on all counts. They voted 10-2 for the death penalty in Dolly's case, and 12-0 in Jack's. The judge agreed. Jones was sentenced to death by lethal injection. Over the next 30 years, He filed numerous appeals. His lawyers pointed to his low IQ and childhood trauma as reasons to reconsider the sentence. But courts repeatedly ruled that the evidence came too late, and that the original verdict would stand. In the end, the system made its decision clear. The man who took 2 innocent lives would face the ultimate punishment, no matter how troubled his past had been. On September 30th, 2025, after more than 3 decades on death row, Victor Tony Jones was executed by lethal injection at Florida State Prison in Rayford. He was 64 years old. Before the execution, Jones was served his final meal: fried chicken, collard greens, and sweet tea. A simple, southern meal, calm before the end. At 6 p.m., the curtain opened. The warden asked if he had any last words. Jones looked straight ahead and said quietly, "No, sir." As the drugs began to flow, his chest moved once, then slowed. At 6:13 p.m., he was pronounced dead. Witnesses described the process as silent, almost mechanical. There were no complications, no struggle, only stillness. Outside the prison, protesters gathered with signs and candles. Some prayed for the victims. Others questioned the system that had taken yet another life. Inside, justice had been carried out. The 13th execution in Florida that year, a modern record for the state. But for those who watched, it was hard to call it closure. It felt more like the final chapter in a story of violence that began long before the murders ever happened. Among the witnesses that evening was Irene Fisher, the only daughter of Jack and Dolly Nestor. For 35 years, she had lived with the memory of losing both her parents in one brutal day. When the curtain closed, Irene spoke softly to reporters outside the prison. "After seeing what I saw tonight," she said, "I wish my parents had that opportunity, to die so gracefully. Just close your eyes and go." Her words carried both relief and sorrow. For her, justice had finally arrived, but it did not erase the loss. A life had been taken, but nothing could bring her parents back. In later interviews, Irene revealed something even more powerful. "I do forgive him," she said, "because forgiveness sets me free. But I'll never forget." Her voice trembled, not with anger, but with understanding, a reminder that even in the shadow of justice, grief does not disappear. It only learns to live quietly beside forgiveness. The execution of Victor Tony Jones closed a case that began 35 years earlier. For the state, justice was done. For the Nestor family, peace finally felt possible, if only in part. But the story of Victor Jones is more than a crime and a punishment. It's the story of how violence can shape a person, and how it can echo through generations. He was once a child beaten and broken by the very system that later took his life. That doesn't excuse what he did, but it forces us to ask, how many lives are lost long before the crime is ever committed? In the end, no court ruling, no execution, can truly undo what happened. It only reminds us that every act of violence, on any side, leaves behind another scar that time alone cannot heal. Justice was served, but peace is never simple. 2 innocent lives were lost. Another ended on a gurney. And somewhere between them lies the question we still struggle to answer. What does justice truly mean? If this story made you think, share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories that explore the human side of crime and consequence.